This is On the Hunt at FoxNews.com. Hello, everybody. I'm Jonathan Hunt. President Obama has announced a change in the plans for the withdrawal of U.S. troops from Afghanistan. Now, up to 10,000 U.S. troops will remain in Afghanistan until at least the end of this year. That after pleas from the new Afghan president, Ashraf Ghani. And all of this comes amid claims that some Taliban members who are already threatening the government of the president, Ashraf Ghani, are now also pledging allegiance to ISIS. So, what does this mean for U.S. policy? What does it mean for the future of Afghanistan? To discuss those questions, I'm joined by Scott Stewart, who is VP of Tactical Analysis with Stratfor, and Lieutenant Colonel Michael Waltz, author of Warrior Diplomat, A Green Beret's Battles from Washington to Afghanistan. Gentlemen, thank you very much for being here. Let me start first with you, Scott. We hear so often these days about differing groups pledging allegiance to ISIS as ISIS extends its grip across what seems to be a growing region. How seriously do we take these claims that Taliban members are now pledging allegiance to ISIS?
No, I think that we can take them seriously. And really, if you look at any terrorist group or radical group historically, you do have fractures. You have internal bickering and fighting. You also have people that become dissatisfied by the fact that the groups are not making more progress. And so there's a tendency for these people to become more radical. And that's what we're seeing right now with these guys who are either, have problems with the Taliban leadership or are, kind of discouraged by their lack of progress. They're able to, or they're wanting to, join the Islamic State that they see as kind of, the new, sexy, aggressive brand. However, I think their appeal is going to be somewhat limited. When we look at the Islamic State's propaganda, they have really railed upon people, like Mullah Omar and his followers, and even the type of Islam they practice. So I think that's going to limit their appeal. In the larger picture. I think it's going to be, it's going to remain somewhat limited.
Colonel Waltz, I wonder what your view of this is, the ISIS role, if any, in Afghanistan, and how that may or may not have played in to President Obama's decision to slow down the withdrawal of American troops.
Well, I'm still very concerned. I mean, I don't disagree that the switch to ISIS could be a result of just dissatisfaction within the ranks of the Taliban. However, my concern are twofold. One, yes, we've slowed our withdrawal, but we shouldn't be fooled. Our policy, the president's policy, is still to pull all American soldiers and, in the words of the White House spokesman, move to an embassy-only presence by the end of 2016, which coincidentally is the end of President Obama's term. So we have a politically driven timeline. And we have a full withdrawal still not too far on the distant horizon when we have the rise of these militant groups, whether it's ISIS or Al-Qaeda or the Taliban or what have you, that could erase our gains in Afghanistan, could destabilize the country, push it towards civil war. And we should never forget that as Afghanistan goes, Pakistan goes, and we have nuclear weapons at play in Pakistan. So I'm very concerned about the flaws in our policy going forward.
Scott, I wonder what your view is on that. Would you agree that the policy is flawed? Should we be leaving these 10,000 or even more troops much longer? America is war-weary, after all. Is there an appetite for this? And should we care about what the public appetite is in terms of making these decisions anyway?
Well, I think we need to look back at the Iraqi example. We completely withdrew from Iraq, and look what happened there. We're having to go back in now, conducting airstrikes. We have people on the ground training, designating targets. So my fear is that if we completely withdraw from Afghanistan, we're going to leave open a situation where we're going to have to return anyways. So perhaps it's better to stay and try to stabilize things than it is to completely withdraw.
Scott, how long would we be looking at staying for, though? One does have to take into account the war weariness of the American public to some extent. Do you think that are we going to be there 10 years, 20 years if we keep these troops there?
Well, I don't think we're talking major combat operations. We don't need, large contingents of ground troops. And even in Iraq, we could have done a lot with just airstrikes and some advisors and trainers on the ground. If you even look at the model we used for taking Afghanistan from the Taliban initially, that was a very small footprint augmented by U.S. air power. And I think that we could help protect the Afghan government from the Taliban using, the same type of methods.
Colonel Waltz, I want to pick up on the point you made about as Afghanistan goes, so goes Pakistan. I think that's a really interesting point. We've got the Taliban already operating across the border there between Afghanistan and Pakistan, a very strong tradition of militancy within Pakistan. How dangerous a situation is it, and how inevitable is it that ISIS gets a hold of or gets traction in Pakistan itself, and how worried should we be about Pakistan becoming a completely failed nation?
Well, there's the answer there is multifold, and there's multiple elements. The Taliban is not a monolithic entity. There are elements that are focused on Afghanistan, and there are elements that are very much focused on destabilizing, perhaps even overthrowing the Islamabad, the regime in Pakistan. And in the seams there, you have Al-Qaeda and now increasingly ISIS. Al-Qaeda has made it known that they do oppose the regime in Pakistan, that they have opposed the Pakistani army, and we know from a number of sources that they intend to get their hands on weapons of mass destruction. So I think we should always be concerned, and that's why we need to begin thinking about our engagement in Afghanistan and in South Asia, much like we did in East Asia in the Korea Peninsula back in the 50s and 60s. I believe, and I think we need to begin, our leadership needs to begin telling the American people what's at stake here, and I believe we're looking at a multi-decade effort. That said, that doesn't mean hundreds and thousands of troops on the ground, but it does mean advisors, it does mean mentors, it means we need to provide the capabilities to bolster both the Afghan and the Pakistani army to keep these militant groups at bay, probably, frankly, for generations to come.
Really, Colonel. So you would, and in that you would think, would 10,000 troops and advisors be around the number you were thinking for these decades to come?
Well, just as a general matter, I think we need to focus on capability and the capability that we need, and we need to focus on conditions on the ground. That then drives the number of troops. I think Washington too often just focuses on the number and then tries to fit our strategy within there. That said, I think 10 to 20,000 would be, at this point, sufficient. But the longer we let this go, the longer we tell the region that we're leaving, the more the Afghan populace, regional governments such as China, Pakistan, Iran, and even the Afghan government are going to begin hedging against us rather than working with us. So what we need is a signal that, and a very strong one and a very consistent one, that we're going to stand with Afghanistan. We are going to stand with the Afghan army for the foreseeable future until they're ready to stand on their own, rather than a series of withdrawal dates. It's not helpful.
Scott, I'll give you the last thought on this. Scott, would you agree that a multi-decade engagement in the region is something that is absolutely necessary for the United States?
Well, let's face it, the problems are not going to go away as long as the ideology of jihadism is pushing these envelopes in these places. They're going to continue to try to destabilize and take over governments. And it's not just Pakistan. We need to worry about India, parts of India. We need to worry about Central Asia, places like Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan. It really is a very large problem. It's also one that the Americans can't tackle alone. We really need to work with our allies in the region, not to only try to find a kinetic solution, but we also need to try to work towards an ideological solution where the Muslims themselves can undercut this deviant ideology of jihadism.
All right, gentlemen, a bracing dose of realism from both of you. Thank you very much. Scott Stewart, VP of Tactical Analysis with Stratfor, and Lieutenant Colonel Michael Waltz, author of Warrior Diplomat. Thank you both very much indeed for your expertise.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
All right, this has been On the Hunt at foxnews.com.